Good Wednesday to you. I'm Victor Blackwell. Welcome to CNN Newsroom. There is a lot happening. Let's start with what's happening right now. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is on his way to the White House. This is his first trip out of Ukraine since Russia began its invasion in February. Now, as he arrived in the U.S., Zelenskyy posted that he was in Washington to thank the American people for their much-needed support. He accepted an invitation from President Biden just a week ago, and since then, the U.S. has worked with Ukraine on some really tight security arrangements for this short trip. The visit will last just a few hours, and after the White House meeting, Zelenskyy will then address a joint meeting of Congress. Joining us now, CNN's chief White House correspondent Phil Mattingly and senior international correspondent Will Ripley, who is in Kyiv. Phil, let's start with you. The administration just announced a new $1.8 billion aid package for Ukraine. Tell us about the timing of the trip and what they'll discuss today.
Yeah, Victor, in just a matter of moments, you're going to see a car pull up right behind me. President Biden step out of the White House to greet President Zelenskyy. His first trip out of Ukraine in the 300 days of war since Russia launched its invasion at the end of February. And I think what you're looking at here is two very poignant issues. The first being the symbolic. Obviously, the first visit out of the country to the by far and away most dedicated ally of Ukraine over the course of that war. And that matters, both because the war is at a very clear pivot point right now after two Ukrainian offensives that have been successful, but also in very much a grinded out mode that is going to take time that U.S. officials say they don't have a clear end game or outcome laid out yet. That will be one of the issues that will likely be discussed in the closed door meetings between the two presidents. The substance here is critical, not just in terms of how things will play out going forward, but as you noted, Victor, the additional $1.8 billion on top of around $20 billion in defense assistance over the course of the last 9 months. And what this tranche of money does more than anything else is expand the capabilities of Ukraine, adding a Patriot missile system, something President Zelenskyy has requested for several months. The administration and President Biden finally signing off on that moving forward. It is just a more in-depth commitment from the U.S., which has been very clear they will be committed throughout at a very critical moment for both Ukraine and the U.S. and Western allies supporting them, Victor.
All right, Phil, again, we will stand by to see that historic drive up to the White House as President Zelenskyy will be meeting with President Biden. Will, to you now in Kyiv. As we discussed, as we just heard from Phil, Zelenskyy's first trip abroad in months, he's coming with a list of things that he'd like. The president is offering more support. What more is he hoping to get out of this visit?
I think he wants a commitment for the long haul, Victor. He doesn't want to be pressured to take concessions or to accept concessions and give Russia Ukrainian territory that was illegally seized going back almost 9 years to 2014. Here in Kyiv and across Ukraine, the Ukrainian people that we've met, that we've spoken with, and leaders as well, up to the very top with President Zelenskyy, say this war that Russia started doesn't end until they get back Crimea, until they get back all the territory in the Donetsk region that the Russians are currently occupying. And so they do not see this as a possible ceasefire where the lines stay as they are. They want to take back territory, and they're having a hard time doing that right now. And it's going to get potentially much harder in the coming months. One, because you have these mobilized Russian troops by the hundreds of thousands that are currently training. And yes, they're green. And yes, Russia is ill-equipped, but they do have larger numbers potentially than what they have in Ukraine, given that it's a much smaller country, although with much better weapons, as we've seen, and brilliant generalmanship as well. I mean, just the battlefield strategy on the part of the Ukrainians has been vastly superior. And yet the Russians are learning, and they now have private mercenaries from the Wagner group fighting. These are very experienced fighters who are on the front lines. And so as a result, the lines are essentially holding. The Russians are not retaking territory. They haven't retaken Bakhmut, which President Zelenskyy just visited, that frontline town that's been under constant Russian bombardment and attack for weeks now. He was there just yesterday. The fact that he is now there today in Washington about to meet with President Biden, it is a truly historic and extraordinary moment, because this is the president that on the first day of the invasion on February 24th stayed in Ukraine, stayed in Kyiv in his bunker. His family, his children stayed in Ukraine. And that moment instantly made him a symbol of the resistance that has now spread, a resistance that every single Ukrainian we've met is taking part in their own way, whether it be those who are volunteering, those who are fighting, those who are cooking meals for their neighbors because nobody in the neighborhood has electricity and they're cooking over a wood stove. That strength was really inspired in many ways by this Ukrainian president, and he wants a commitment from the U.S. just as he wants from NATO for more weapons. Every time that new weapon systems arrive, he asks for more. He asks for more because he says this is not just Ukraine's fight. He says Ukraine is fighting a war against Russia, but it's a war that the entire world could have to fight if Ukraine loses this war, Victor.
All right, we see now President and First Lady Jill Biden, they are now waiting for President Zelenskyy to drive up. The Marines there on the drive, and we're expecting to see the car drive up here. So we will pause for a moment and listen in as the President welcomes President Zelenskyy of Ukraine.
Ready, close. Ready, shut. Ready, face. Forward, forward. Yeah, that's right. Пане президенте, з яким умовом плануєте поїхати з Вашингтона? Пане президенте! Пане президенте, з якими результатами плануєте поїхати з Вашингтона?
Zelenskyy inside the White House. We'll see them again in just a few minutes. But quickly from you, Phil, because I know you've got to go inside as well. This president entered office saying that this century would be about democracies versus dictatorships. What does this commitment and showing the world his commitment to supporting Ukraine in their fight against Russia mean to President Biden?
Everything to some degree, and I'm not trying to overstate things, but the existential moment the president believes that the United States, really geopolitically the entire world is in, has been brought to a very acute manner in the sense of what they've seen with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Obviously, it's often thought through the context of where China is in the competition with China, but this in particular and this moment has been critical. It has really driven the last year from this administration, this White House, and has gotten at the core of what President Biden has long said is so critical, the Western alliance that has been in place for 80-plus years that he wants to maintain, Victor.
All right, Phil Mattingly, I know you've got to get inside the White House. We'll see you in a couple of minutes as well. Will, stay with us, and I want to expand the conversation now and bring in CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh, retired U.S. Army Major Mike Lyons, Stephen Pfeiffer, former ambassador to Ukraine and an affiliate for the Stanford Center for International Security and Cooperation. Mr. Ambassador, let me start with you, and then I'll get this from you as well, Major. But diplomatically, talk about the timing. Why now? Why this trip, the first one out of Ukraine to the U.S. For President Zelenskyy?
Yeah, I believe there are several factors. One is to have a face-to-face conversation with President Biden. I mean, from Kyiv's point of view, Washington is the leading element of this effort to support Ukraine and do things like impose sanctions on Russia. So it's a sense for the two leaders to get together. I think President Zelenskyy will be expressing gratitude for American support, but he's also going to be asking for more. He's in a situation where he needs more American arms if they're going to continue to push the Russians back as they have over the last 3 months. And I think also his address to Congress is going to be important. Traditionally, over the last 30 years, support for Ukraine has been bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats. But you've seen over the last 6 months some worrisome signs in some Republican ranks. And so I think President Zelenskyy has an opportunity to make the case for why he needs more help from America, but also why providing that help is in the American interest.
And we'll talk about that address that's scheduled for the 7 p.m. hour tonight in just a moment. Major, let me come to you. Militarily, the war has ebbed and flowed for both the Ukraine and Russia. This moment, what are we seeing that gives President Zelenskyy the confidence that he can leave his country, come back as well? What do you see on the ground?
I think it's still high risk. I think the fact that the Russians have retreated on the eastern side of the Dnipro River, they are foraging that place like, tomorrow. They're doing everything they can, digging in. There's just maybe a slight pause on their part. but they've got offensive operations that they're trying to likely do, the Russians are, to take back some of those areas that they just lost. Counteroffensives. It's wintertime. I check my weather app every day to see what's going on there. It is more difficult for the Ukraine side on that. Ukraine still doesn't have the river crossing capability to go on the counteroffensive. That would be the United States' military support. Give them what they can to go on the counteroffensive. And then one last point, to the north in Belarus, there is a risk of Russia aligning with the Belarusian military and potentially opening up another front that could potentially threaten Kyiv. That still always hangs out there. So lots going on from a Ukraine military perspective. I think this leader had to do this now at this point. Now's the time to come thank the president and also get more military equipment.
Nick, the thoughts on the welcome here of the president of Ukraine. What do you see? What do you think?
I mean, you have to wind back to February when the intelligence was accurately predicting a Russian invasion, but saying it could be over possibly in a matter of weeks because Russia would be so vastly superior as a military. And now here we have Volodymyr Zelenskyy, a reality TV actor before he turned president, now getting out of an armoured vehicle and being welcomed by the commander-in-chief of the most powerful military of the world. Images you frankly could simply never have imagined would be the case. You couldn't really have imagined back in February that Zelenskyy would have been so successful as a figure uniting his nation, allowing them to resist Russia's invasion, and now over the past months take back huge swathes of Ukraine that for so long you'd begun to feel might permanently become part of Moscow's grasp. And I have to say, when I saw him getting out of that vehicle, Joe Biden putting his arm around him, you really get a sense, I think, of how important the choreography, the symbolism of this trip really is. There is Zelenskyy in military fatigues, everyone to be reminded this is the man who daily sends men to the front line to die. The Ukrainian trident on his sweatshirt there. And this is a man clearly who's probably having the first moment out of Ukraine for a significant period of time. He'll be jet lagged, he'll have a list in his mind of the things he needs Joe Biden to understand. But this is also too about showing the world that regardless of the belief you might have about how Western nations have a limited patience for this fight, that they don't want to spend unlimited resources on supporting Ukraine or see the economic damage they're suffering because of the energy crisis go on for years, that essentially Washington is doing this because it wants to remind people in this relative lull in the conflict that their patience too is long-term, that they have the capacity for this to go on maybe for months longer than anybody had previously expected. Because essentially the Kremlin's logic in all of this is that if they wait out the West, if they see electoral cycles change in Western democracies, that they might see a softening of Western resolve. And I think this is about a new Congress coming into play, the same leader who's remarkably managed to hold Ukraine together, finally getting a chance to meet the man who's supplied so much of their weaponry and finance over the past months. And I have to say, when I saw him get out of that vehicle and join Joe Biden, it was quite a remarkable moment, not something anybody who saw this war began necessarily foresaw as a moment when the anticipation had been of a swift Russian military victory. And it just reminds you of how startling Ukraine's resistance has been, and also the tens of thousands of lives we've lost over the last months.
Yeah, a startling moment indeed, seeing a stunning moment, I should say, to see Zelenskyy there welcomed at the White House. We will also, as we've discussed, see President Zelenskyy address a joint session of Congress in the 7 p.m. Eastern hour. Ambassador, before I get back to Will, let me come back to you. Obviously, he is speaking there to a Congress, one chamber of which will soon be led by Republicans. The commitment to supporting Ukraine has ranged from it is imperative to not another penny. That's one audience, but there's also the audience of the American people. Detail what he has to say to an audience who will be watching on television about why it is still important to support his country as they fight off this Russian invasion.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a couple of central points in Zelensky's speech to Congress and also to the broader American public. One, there will be gratitude. I mean, the United States has been the key partner for Ukraine as it fights off this unprovoked war of aggression that Vladimir Putin launched on Ukraine back in February. But also, I think he will detail the case for continuing to support Ukraine and for providing more weapons, and making the point that, of course, it's in Ukraine's interest, but that Ukraine is really fighting Russia in a way that also is important for American interests. And I'll make 2 points. Going back 70 years, it's been in the U.S. national interest to have a stable and secure Europe. If Russia wins this war, you're not going to have that kind of Europe. It's going to soak up much more time and American resources. But the second point is, we don't know how far Vladimir Putin's ambitions go. When he talks about Ukraine, he talks about not a sovereign country, but what he refers to as historic Russian land. If you look at a map of the Russian Empire, the Baltic states and part of Poland were once historic Russian land. And we have to ask ourselves, how far do Putin's ambitions go? With regards to Ukraine, our commitment is to provide money and arms. If it got to the Baltic states or Poland, those countries are members of NATO. Yeah. And at that point, you're talking about providing American soldiers. It's better for the United States to stop Putin in Ukraine.
Will, has there been some reaction from the Kremlin to this additional support and to this visit?
Yeah, certainly. The Patriot missile systems, they've said that they would be legitimate targets, that they would try to find them and hit them with their own missiles, if, of course, that was possible, which is an open question. A lot of these Russian missiles don't miss their targets. Even with Ukraine's existing missile defense, they shoot the majority of them down, but those that do make it through are causing catastrophic damage to the civilian power grid here. Vladimir Putin just today had a meeting talking about the need to modernize his military. And if you listen to the things that he was saying, they're really doubling down on almost, moving Russia more towards a military state type of strategy. And when he talked about the fighting in Ukraine, acknowledging the difficulties, acknowledging the need for his military to improve, acknowledging the need for training, he basically said, whatever the military needs, the military is going to get in terms of resources. Why is that frightening? Well, he also talked about Ukraine just being one of many potential front lines. In other words, Russia up against NATO and the West. This is the unspoken, and actually not even unspoken now, it is the spoken intent of Vladimir Putin. He is not giving up on Ukraine and, in fact, doubling down on beefing up his own military. Now, is that any match for these U.S. weapons and these resources that are being flooded into Ukraine? It hasn't been so far in a substantial way. But you mentioned earlier up the northern border with Belarus, where Russian troops are assembling, and their numbers have been increasing in at least 3 regions in Belarus. Putin and Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, who are very close allies and friends, they had a meeting the other day talking about deepening their partnership. This is potentially another line that could open up. It's the Ukrainians here in Kyiv are certainly stating publicly, they said to The Economist, signaling that they think an advance on Kyiv is going to happen at some point early next year. Granted, both sides, as Nick has pointed out, do use disinformation to their advantage to try to throw off the other side. But could, an exhausted Ukrainian military, which is fighting fiercely in the east and to the south, also have to fight up north? Do they have the resources and the weapons to do that? All of these are things that President Zelenskyy will be discussing with President Biden and his inner circle at the White House today.
Major, let me quickly wrap with you. With the addition of the Patriot missile systems, does Ukraine now have the full arsenal that you think they need, or are there additional types of weaponry that you think they need to fight off Russia?
Patriots are good. They're not game changers, though. They're going to help them protect their critical infrastructure until the United States provides offensive weapons, and that's where I think the line gets drawn about whether or not we're well into this, ATACMS, other those kinds of things. The bottom line is Zelenskyy still doesn't have leverage over Russia to get them to stop fighting. I think Ukraine military would have to threaten Crimea. I think that is the Alamo. They have to have that naval port. They have to have that for the Black Sea Fleet. And if they could somehow figure out a way to go on the offensive, at least threaten that, then they have some leverage on their side. Patriots good, don't get me wrong, but still not a game changer. All
right, Major Mike Lyons, Nick Payton Walsh, Ambassador Stephen Pfeiffer, Will Ripley, thank you all. We will see, of course, President Biden and President Zelenskyy in just a couple of minutes in the Oval Office. We're days away from seeing years of former President Donald Trump's taxes. Democrats on the House Ways and Means Committee voted to release Trump's returns. A member of that committee joins me ahead. Also, snow and temperatures are beginning to fall across the country. More than 90 million Americans are under winter weather alerts. How this is already impacting people trying to get to their holiday destinations, that's ahead.
Payroll takes too long. At least it used to. Now there's Roll, the app that makes payroll as easy as sending a text. You're slinging tacos and you've got a minute between orders to handle payroll. What do? Step 1, type run payroll. Respond to a couple questions. And that's it. Done. And they're paid tomorrow, not 4 days from now. If you know how to send a text, you know how to use Roll. Go to GetRoll.com/EV and get your first 3 months free and unlimited payroll.
I was born here, I'm from here, and I'm never leaving here. I'm a New York hotel. Yeah, I'm tall, 563 feet and 2 inches. I'm on top of the world. I'm looking for someone who likes to be in the middle of it all, but also likes some peace and quiet. You hungry? I know a place, and a few others nearby. It's the city that never sleeps. But hey, if you need the rest, I've got you covered.
If you still have symptoms of moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis or active psoriatic arthritis after a TNF blocker like Humira or Enbrel, Rinvoq is different and may help.
Stand up to your symptoms with Rinvoq. Rinvoq is a once-daily pill that tackles pain, stiffness, swelling. For some, Rinvoq significantly reduces RA and PSA fatigue.
It can stop further irreversible joint damage, and Rinvoq can leave skin clear or almost clear in PSA. That's Rinvoq relief.
Rinvoq can lower your ability to fight infections, including TB, serious infections and blood clots, some fatal, cancers including lymphoma and skin cancer, death, heart attack, stroke, and tears in the stomach or intestines occurred. People 50 and older with at least one heart disease risk factor have higher risks. Don't take if allergic to Rinvoq, as serious reactions can occur. Tell your doctor if you are or may become pregnant.
Ask your rheumatologist for Rinvoq. Rinvoq. Make it your mission. Learn how AbbVie could help you save.
Hey, Peloton, step into your power. Let's go.
Ah, you didn't come to work out. You came to outwork. Let's get it. Yo. Boom. Come on, you got this. Everyday man's on the block. Beats,
no challenge, no change.
The ting goes. Let's go.
Get $400 off Peloton packages. Terms apply.
Consumer Cellular has the best customer service.
They care about the customer.
The best price with the best quality.
The prices, the coverage.
Consumer Cellular provides the exact same premium coverage as the nation's leading carriers. And while prices rise, ours are dropping. Get unlimited talk and text with a flexible data plan starting at $20 a month.
It's like 4 scoops of ice cream for the price of 1.
Switch today and save up to half on your wireless. Add extra lines anytime for just $15 each. Call or go online.
What should the future deliver? Progress? Innovation? Discovery? Or simply stability, security, protection? You shouldn't have to choose. Gold, your strategic advantage. Visit goldhub.com.
Closed captioning brought to you by Mesobook.com.
We offer a free book on mesothelioma. Call for the free book and receive so much more. Call 1-800-831-3700.
The House Ways and Means Committee has voted to publicly release 6 years of former President Donald Trump's tax returns. The Democrats on the panel also released a summary of their findings, and they revealed that Trump paid 0 federal taxes in his last year in office. They also found the IRS failed to follow its own mandate to properly audit presidents and only began one audit of Trump over his term. Democratic Congressman Dan Kildee is a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. He joins me now. Good to have you back, Congressman. Those are the headlines that I pulled from what your committee has released. What is your top takeaway?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, Victor, thanks for having me on. 2 significant takeaways for me. One was that I was actually shocked that the IRS had not been following its own policy. It has been a practice of the IRS since 1977 to audit presidential tax returns. In the Trump era, they simply didn't do it. And in fact, the only audit they initiated was initiated on the very same day that they received the letter from Chairman Richie Neal asking under Section 6103 for access to these returns and information about the audits. That was one big shocker. But then as we examine the returns themselves, we've talked about this, we've speculated about what Mr. Trump was doing with his businesses to avoid taxes. But to see 2 years where he paid $750 in income taxes to the federal government, 1 year where he paid zero. And then all the various ways that he obviously used undocumented or unsubstantiated expenses to avoid paying taxes, it became very clear to me that something is dramatically wrong here and something has to be done. And of course, that leads to the purpose of the inquiry in the first place, to produce legislation to correct this problem.
So your two headlines here, when you say there's something dramatically wrong here and you highlight how much the former president did or did not pay in federal taxes, did you see any evidence that suggests illegality?
You know, that I don't know. It's, you know, to me, it's hard for me to imagine that it's legal to be one of the richest people in America, according to his own assertions, and to have all sorts of wealth coming in on a regular basis, but never have any income and actually have nothing but net losses. So, you know, I'm not a tax expert, except I see what I see on the page, and I know that there's something not right. It clearly at least points to a situation where there are two tax codes in this country, one for people who go to work every day, and another tax code for the people like Donald Trump who can hire the professionals to dodge responsibility. I don't know if any of this was illegal, but I can tell you this, it doesn't look right to me as a person who's studied the tax code for a long time, and that's why we felt it was important to send this information to the Congress, along with recommendations that we act upon it. And frankly, I didn't think it was sufficient simply to send our analysis. I personally was very much of the view that we have to send the full documentation so that we don't get into a situation where Trump's allies, who will pick any way they can to defend him, will simply say that we selectively picked pieces of his returns in order to highlight the most egregious aspects of it. They can look at the whole thing, and they can make their own judgments.
So now on the presidential audit program, Democrats have suggested there should be more staffing there at the IRS to handle these complicated returns. And as I said, that there was one that was started during the term that has not been completed, according to Stacey Plaskett, a representative who was also on the committee. Is it clear to you that this was solely a resource problem, that they did not have the people to complete these audits, or that there was any avoidance there at the IRS during the Trump administration to audit the former president's tax returns?
Well, I think the IRS generally has a resource problem, but it's difficult for me to take that the IRS would use as a defense that it couldn't supply the sufficient manpower to do something as important as auditing the tax returns of the President of the United States, particularly one of the wealthiest people in the country. They assigned one person with no degree of specialization in this type of tax policy. So, look, IRS needs more resource, for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's a sufficient excuse for them not to have done a job that the American people expect them to do to make sure that their president is held accountable for following the laws of the United States.
So, of course, when sending this on to the Senate, this becomes public, these 6 years of tax returns. You've talked about the legislative, the policy element here. I want to play for you what you said. This is April of 2019 about the goals of the request of these returns.
Now, let's be clear. We're not asking for these returns to be made public. It's not even clear that other members of the committee, myself included, will ever see any of this information. This is specific to Chairman Neal because he needs this information in order to frame the questions that we are trying to answer and the policies that we are trying to potentially enact. So
now why are they being made public?
Well, because we were able to do the analysis. We didn't ask when we sent the request under 6103 in April of 2019. We didn't ask then for the IRS to publicize the documents. We asked them to provide them to us so that we can do the analysis required. After having done that analysis, we made the determination that the next necessary step was twofold. One, to prepare legislation in order to correct what we saw after a review of these really significant deficiencies. And second, to supply the information that we think is necessary to justify enacting this legislation. And in our judgment, that included disclosing the base information that was used to formulate our judgment in the first place. So it's a distinction as to what we were asking of the IRS, not so much what determination we made once having done the analysis.
Congressman Dan Kildee of Michigan, thank you.
Thank you.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is now meeting with President Biden, and we are expected to hear remarks from the two leaders in the Oval Office. We'll bring those to you live.
The Eat Fresh Refresh just won't stop. Now Subway's refreshing their catering with easy order platters and lunch boxes perfect for any party. Pool parties, tailgates, holiday parties, even retirement parties.
Man, I love parties.
Subway keeps refreshing and refreshing.
When they're sick, they get comfortable anywhere and spread germs everywhere. Wherever they rest, protection. Nothing kills more viruses, including the COVID-19 virus, on more surfaces than Lysol disinfectant spray. Lysol, what it takes to protect.
COVID-19. Some people get it, and some people can get it bad. And for those who do get it bad, it may be because they have a high risk factor, such as heart disease, diabetes, being overweight, asthma, or smoking. Even if symptoms feel mild, these factors can increase your risk of COVID-19 turning severe. So if you're at high risk and test positive, don't wait. Ask your healthcare provider right away if an authorized oral treatment is right for you.
It's been harder than I thought.
Nothing works now that you're gone.
The neighborhood is falling apart these days.
What are you doing?
Parallel parking.
Parallel to what? My life was black and white before Sonia. She was the color.
You think you have to do everything on your own, but no one can.
You can't stand watching one idiot try to teach another how to drive. It's lesson time.
Thank you.
Clutch in and brake. The car is stopped.
I almost hit the car.
It's all right. It's a hybrid.
A Man Called Otto. Only in movie theaters. Rated PG-13.
The unknown is not empty. It's a storm that crashes and consumes, replacing thought with worry. But one thing can calm uncertainty. An answer. Uncovered through exploration, teamwork, and innovation. An answer that leads to even more answers. Mayo Clinic. You know where to go.
If you use Shipco, this whole thing wouldn't be a thing.
Yeah, Dad, I don't want to deal with it.
Oh, you brought your luggage to the airport. That's adorable. With Shipco, shipping your luggage before you fly, you'll never have to wait around here again. Like, ever. That can't be comfortable, though. Shipco.com, the smart, fast, easy way to travel.
Research shows people remember commercials with nostalgia. So to help you remember that Liberty Mutual customizes your home insurance, here's one that'll really take you back.
Wow! What'd you get, Ryan?
It's customized home insurance from Liberty Mutual.
What does it do, bud?
It customizes our home insurance so we only pay for what we need.
And what did you get, Mike?
I got a bike.
Only pay for what you need.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Happy New Year, everyone. You know what I like about this? You're all together. Cheers to you guys. Oh, boy.
New Year's Eve Live with Anderson Cooper and Andy Cohen. Live coverage starts at 8 on CNN.
Are you looking for a new career with real growth potential? Spectrum is hiring. Whether you're looking to help customers, share knowledge, make connections, or enjoy uncapped earning potential, we have a role for you. So if you're ready to start a career with a company that offers comprehensive benefits, 401k, and complimentary services, visit jobs.spectrum.com today.
With Gold Bond, you can age on your own terms. New Retinol Overnight means the smoothing benefits of retinol are now for your whole body. Plus, fast-working crepe corrector diminishes wrinkled skin in just 2 days. Gold Bond, champion your skin.
Hey, let's check out this park. Oh, wow, that's really cool. To find a great local park or forest near you, go to discovertheforest.org.
Trip to be here, and it's an honor to be by your side in the united defense against what is a brutal, brutal war being waged by Putin. 300 days, hard to believe, 300 days we've been going through this, and Putin has waged a brutal assault on the Ukraine's right to exist as a nation, and the attack on innocent Ukrainian people for no reason other than intimidate. And he's escalated his assault on civilians after hitting schools, orphanages, hospitals, landmarks. And he's trying to use winter as a weapon. And but the Ukrainian people continue to inspire the world. I mean that sincerely. Not just inspire us, but inspire the world with their courage and how they have chose their resilience and resolve for their future. And the American people have stood proudly with them, Democrats and Republicans, together with our allies in Europe and Japan and other places, to make sure you have the financial, humanitarian, and security assistance that is needed. We're going to talk about that today. And we're going to continue to strengthen Ukraine's ability to defend itself, particularly air defense, and that's why we're going to be providing Ukraine with Patriot missile battery and training your forces to be able to accurately use it. Together with our partners, we're also going to continue to impose costs on the Kremlin, and we'll support Ukraine in pursuing a just peace. President Zelenskyy, the United States stands with the brave people of Ukraine. We stand with you. You've been a great leader. And by the way, we have a famous thing that occurs once a year. We pick the Man of the Year in Time magazine. You are the Man of the Year in the United States of America. And so welcome. We have a lot to talk about. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Great honor for me to be here. Dear journalists, I thank you so much for the invitation. I really wanted to come earlier. Mr. President knows about it, but I couldn't do it because the situation was so difficult. And now, if I came, I mean that we control the situation, and because of support. And first of all, because of your support, and I understand that we have very important topics and we'll discuss them, everything, so many challenges in Ukraine, in Europe, in the world, and from energy to situation on battlefield. But first of all, all my appreciations from my heart, from the hearts of Ukrainians, all Ukrainians, from our nation, strong nations, all the appreciation to you, first of all, Mr. President, for your big support and leadership. Of course, Europe, many countries helped us and are helping now, because the war is not over. It's a bit, but anyway, but that is your leadership. Thank you, first of all. Thank you so much, Mr. President. Of course, thanks bipartisan support, thanks Congress, and thanks from our just ordinary people to your ordinary people, Americans. I really appreciate. I think it's very difficult to understand what does it mean when we say appreciate, but you really have to feel it. And thank you so much. Great honor to be here. And yesterday I was on Donbass in Bakhmut. That is the place on the east of our country. You know all the details. We had so many phone calls and spoke detailedly about it. And I want to give you something. One guy, he's really real hero, real captain, and he asked me to pass his award. And he asked me to pass his award to President Biden. And you will understand, he is the captain of HIMARS battery. Yes, he's very brave, and he said, give it to very brave president. And I want to give you that is the cross for military merit. That is one.
Oh, God love you.
Yes, that is from him, and I have the list. He wrote the list. Yes, I didn't read, Mr. President. I can't read. It's not it's in Ukrainian language, but here the translation. It's from him.
And his name is, I have his name, I could contact him?
Yes, yes.
Pavlo.
Tak.
Well, undeserved, but much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
He said that many his brothers, this system saved. So thank you very much.
Well, we have a tradition here, and I will give it to him. My son, who fought in Iraq, they have what they call a command coin. You've seen those coins we have in the battlefield. I will make sure that he gets one of those.
Great. Give me, I will give.
Well, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. What a great honor.
Thank you.
Great honor. Well, thank you, press. Appreciate it.
All right, President Biden there welcoming in President Volodymyr Zelenskyy of Ukraine. We saw, of course, President Biden continue the commitment of the United States to support Ukraine in its fight against this Russian invasion that's gone now more than 300 days. And from President Zelenskyy, bringing, as he said, his appreciation, all my appreciation and all the appreciation of the people of Ukraine, and then passing on from a captain that he was visiting with yesterday, this cross for military merit. Let's bring back in now CNN's chief White House correspondent, Phil Mattingly, who was there in the room, CNN senior international correspondent Will Ripley in Kyiv, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine Steve Pfeiffer, and retired Major Mike Lyons. Phil, to you, the president, as he received that, said that he would send the command coin back to that captain, but also the quite obvious and genuine appreciation from the president of this cross that he received from the president. What did you see there in the room?
Yeah, it was not expected. I can tell you that in terms of bringing folks as we walked out of the Oval Office. And I think it was absolutely, as you heard from the president, as he said, undeserved but very appreciated. And I think that's also a very personal touch to a very real tragedy that President Zelenskyy is dealing with on a day-to-day basis in his country. And President Zelenskyy alluded to the fact that, look, they have a relationship between the two of them. They speak on the phone constantly. They have video conferences fairly regularly. But this is their first face-to-face meeting since the invasion, and adding that personal element to what are expected to be very intensive discussions over the course of the next 2 hours, I think is a level of understanding of, I think, personally how President Biden operates and the kind of the depth in which he approaches issues and moments like this, but also a recognition of the necessity of displaying this to the American public as well. So much of this trip is the obvious symbolism, the obvious parallels perhaps to the Churchill speech to Congress in the few days after Pearl Harbor, but also it underscores the moment that Ukraine is in a war that is very much at a stalemate moment right now, where more assistance will be needed, more commitment will be needed, at the same time that the Western coalition that has stood steadfastly behind them is without question dealing with their own individual domestic issues. There's a very real concern about some level of exhaustion on the side of the coalition's part. And so making sure that the actual realities on the ground and what he can bring to help demonstrate that, I think, was critical, given not just what's going to happen over the course of the next several hours, which will be incredibly important, but also what's going to happen over the next several months, Victor.
Yeah, the several months of winter there in Ukraine. And that brings me to you, Will Ripley. The president said that Russia is now using winter as a weapon. We've seen for months now, in preparation for these colder temperatures, Russia hitting the infrastructure, knocking the power grid, and the Ukrainians, they're having to suffer through the darkness and the cold as this now goes on into the beginning of 2023.
Every single day, Victor, people who lived a living standard in most places in Ukraine comparable to the average American, with electricity, running water, the comforts of home that we so easily take for granted. And now they're living with a few hours of electricity a day in many cases, sometimes the inability to cook, the inability to heat their homes, and they have to go to tents to warm up that the government has set up. Times are tough for a lot of people here in Ukraine, and that's away from the front lines. Of course, the front lines are a whole different story, where people in their homes at any hour of the day or night run the risk of having Russian artillery destroy their home, kill them or their loved ones. but anywhere else in Ukraine. Every city in Ukraine is being touched and is sacrificing and suffering because the power grid is operating at such a limited capacity because of these relentless Russian airstrikes. Even as President Zelenskyy tweeted that he was on the way to go visit with President Biden, the air raid sirens went off across the country. That happens every single day here. But I just have to also, as I was watching that extraordinary moment, and you know, President Zelenskyy giving President Biden that hero's medal, all I could think of is that this guy, in many ways, appears to be made for this moment. And it would have been improbable to think of that, given his background. He was a television comedian. He was very famous, probably Ukraine's most famous comedian. But he was not a serious, hardened character when all of this began. Certainly when his political career began. He was popular, yes. But that popularity has now transcended to this new level. He has inspired people here in Ukraine. And he's so confident in his ability to lead this country through this war that the elections scheduled for next year are still going on. He is still going to run again for president. He has not declared martial law and extended his term. He's going to run, and the odds are overwhelming that he will win by a landslide because there's really nobody else in Ukraine that feels that they could do this better than he's doing it right now. The way that he schmoozes, the way that he deals with Hollywood figures, politicians, just watching him in action. And it's going to be really fascinating, Victor, to watch him meeting with members of Congress and giving that primetime speech later today.
Major, what's your reaction to what you saw there?
Yeah, as a former captain of the artillery in combat, I didn't show the courage I'm sure that captain showed, but I was taken by that award and the fact that he's a battery commander of HIMARS. They get up every day and defend their country. They have men and women in that battery. They have to survive. That's a weapon system making a difference on the ground tactically. And for what he did there, for what President Zelenskyy did in that, and highlight that, to me, just shows the level of appreciation I think he has for what U.S. forces are doing there. But again, that equipment there, that's a difference maker. And as a soldier looking at that, I was very moved by it.
Ambassador, as we wrap this to you, we of course have talked in the last segment about what President Zelenskyy wants to hear from President Biden, what they want to know about the support that will be sustained throughout the rest of this war. What does the U.S. want to hear from Zelenskyy while he's here?
I think what President Biden will want to hear is to get some idea as to how President Zelenskyy sees the next several months playing out. You know, what is Zelenskyy aiming to achieve? And that will be useful in terms of framing the kinds of assistance that the United States can provide in the coming months. Because it is a delicate period. It's now winter. There was, I think, a fairly general expectation among Western observers that the pace of fighting might slow down, although some of the senior Ukrainian officials have suggested, no, if they see an opportunity, they will go ahead and take advantage of it. I'd just like to comment one thing, again, it's kind of remarkable here is, you know, yesterday, President Zelenskyy was on the front line, and he does that. He regularly visits the front line and talks to the troops in the field. And yesterday when he was in Bakhmut, that's a town that the Russians have been trying to take for more than 4 months now, and they've not succeeded. But when they showed film of Zelenskyy presenting awards to Ukrainian military personnel in Bakhmut, you could hear in the background the boom of the artillery. He's close to the front. Vladimir Putin has never gone near to the front. And then a day later, you know, he's in the United States to bring that memento from his visit to Bakhmut and present it to President Biden. I think that was a nice personal touch, but I think it also is indicative of the personal bond that President Zelenskyy is trying to forge with President Biden, because he recognizes that President Biden is critical both to Ukraine's support, but also critical to leading this coalition that has emerged in the last 10 months to support Ukraine, isolate Russia, and impose economic sanctions on Russia.
All right, Ambassador Pfeiffer, Major Lyons, Phil Mattingly, Will Ripley, thank you. Of course, we will see those two gentlemen again before that address before Congress this evening. After an 18-month-long investigation, several hearings, and stunning testimony, the January 6th committee will release its final report. We'll talk about what you should expect ahead.